How they mislabeled her healing as self-absorption. What follows is a quote from The Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. I have long exercised an honest introspection, the exquisitely painful approach to wisdom. Self-scrutiny, relentless observance of one's thoughts, is a stark and shattering experience. It pulverizes the stoutest ego. But true self-analysis mathematically operates to produce seers. The way of self-expression, individual acknowledgments, results in egotists, sure of the right to their private interpretations of God and the universe. End quote. When I first saw that quote, it bothered me. It bothered me in the sense that it related self-expression to self-absorption, and for me, left out the element of self-expression as a medium and perhaps a translation tool for ourselves as part of our greater society. Now let me say this. I didn't read any further along in the text, so I am acknowledging that the context of the words I read may not be complete. This, therefore, is not meant to be a critique of Yogananda's writings or beliefs, but instead an analysis of my own personal beliefs inspired by the excerpt from Yogananda's book. That is all. So the question that arose for me as a result of my exposure to this excerpt was this: does radical self-expression play a role in the betterment of a community or group? Essentially, is radical self-expression at the crux of the same self-scrutiny and relentless observance of one's thoughts that leads to egotists that Yogananda describes? Is this a masturbatory process made public for the purpose of fake deep dialogue and nurtured narcissism? I pose these questions both to myself and to you. I pose them to me as I recognize myself to be responsible to a large extent for spreading the message and meaning of radical self-expression to the millions who will use it to own themselves. And I pose them to you as a seeker. If you're watching, reading, or listening to this essay, your curiosity around self-expression is an access point and, moreover, I think, proof that you're readying yourself to apply what you know about you to more areas of your life, and ultimately to the point where you are working, playing, and everything in between as your most authentic, most fully expressed self. I believe the answer to those questions is no. No, radical self-expression is not about incessant self-evaluation with the outcome of feelings of being hopelessly trapped by your patterns and past experiences. No, radical self-expression is not about the connotation of selfishness for the purpose of alienating or devaluing the perspectives and needs of anyone not you. And no, radical self-expression is not the battle cry of an angry, immigrant, black, feminist, unschooling nomad who is just mad at the world for things that will probably never change. If you're drawn to pattern work, I call them the Sankofa arts of self-exploration, self-inquiry, and personal development, you are not looking inward for inward's sake. These practices can lead to self-absorption, I'm sure, but not inherently so. And moreover, I'm warning you that the notion of self-expression being similar to self-absorption is designed to keep you from a deeper understanding of yourself, which is a prime breeding ground not just for depression, but for your oppression. Anything that discourages you from paying attention to your feelings on something is made from the same element as oppression. When you engage in the Sankofa arts, you sift through the experiences that help shape the reality in which you live today, and you will inevitably find instances that you suspect, if not realize for sure, shifted you from a particular way that you were to the particular way that you are now. Sometimes that shift from were to are is a positive shift, and it was necessary to help you grow tougher skin in the areas that were too soft to thrive. Oftentimes, that shift from were to are is painful and involuntary or unwanted, as in a breakup or a death, and we reluctantly walk from one perspective to a new one, courtesy of that mind stretch. But then there are the other times, the times when the shift from how you were to how you are now erected a wall meant to protect you from something, a particular emotion, a person, a tendency, or a demon of yours. But that protective wall, as I've observed so many times in my own past, and in the voice work I do with my clients, often becomes a barrier to your own progress. This wall is meant to be temporary, a protective fortress with which you shelter yourself while you go through the process and eventually embody radical self-expression. That process has 3 parts, and they are wound licking, wailing, and then expression. Wound licking is the recognition of the hurt and the why me stage. It's where we see the hurt as a major element of our existence in that moment, and we own it as a part of who we are right then. In this stage, we say, I am hurt. We claim it. I think it's healthy. And unfortunately, this is the space where we're most often rushed through our pain by well-meaning loved ones who tell us to pick ourselves up and move on, and all the shit that feels grossly offensive and highly unlikely when we're all up in the feeling of the thing. Wound licking is important. Animals know. They instinctively lick their wounds, perhaps because they know that their saliva, much like human saliva, acts as an antiseptic through the presence of an enzyme their and our bodies create called lysozyme. We share the same enzyme in our saliva and in our tears, and it breaks down the cell walls of certain bacteria. So when we lick our wounds and shed our tears, we are doing what we biologically and intuitively know, that we are allowed to call hurt hurt, and we are allowed to tend to our hurt. We need that stage, and it is as vital a part of radical self-expression as the healing itself. Then there's the wailing stage. Wailing is where we present the wound to the world and yell at the top of our lungs that this is not okay. We are not okay. In this stage, we say, I am hurting. We proclaim it. We're acknowledging the hurt just as we were in the wound licking stage, but this time we're also acknowledging that we and the hurt are separate. Perhaps in this stage, the lysozyme from our wound licking and our tears have weakened the walls that show up to protect us from the raw nerve portion of our hurt. Here, we begin to see ourselves as someone who has been hurt, meaning at some point we were not hurt, and that hurt is not something we inherently are, but something that we are now experiencing. This stage is also important, so much that many, if not most of us, get stuck right there. Just as an animal can end up licking their wound too much, to the point where it doesn't get the chance to dry out and heal, we too can give a toxic amount of attention to the wound site and not enough to what we can do to manage the pain, adjust our strides, and breathe through to our healing. We hop back and forth among the hot-cold stages of wound licking and wailing, and without the tools to move forward, we never get to the 3rd stage. The 3rd stage is where we identify the tools we need to start using the hurt as a resource for defining ourselves. The tools to name and call out what we survived and what we will no longer accept as a result of that experience, so that we can consciously and actively begin to be and inspire change around that particular thing. Self-exploration, the willingness to question and talk about the parts of you that are not well, and the parts of you that have been on autopilot, where they should have been possibly discarded, is how we put wound licking and wailing to good use. We transition from the sheep trying not to get hurt or embarrassed, to the wings that free the shepherd from lies she's been told and the lies that she let herself believe. In Yogananda's excerpt, the self part of the phrase, self-expression, was lined with the same emotions as the self part in selfish and self-centered, but it is simply not so. It is not so because until and unless we explore the spaces in our past and present where we were or are stifled, hurt, or oppressed in ways of real consequence, then we're limited as to how we can serve our families and our communities with what we learned about ourselves and our life through surviving that hurt. So, radical self-expression is an inward journey with results that benefit the woman and her world. When she understands herself and understands how to apply that knowledge of herself to her time, her talents, and her tasks, then she can serve and support the things that are aligned with her innate self and affect change, or perhaps just healthy dialogue around the things that are not. She develops a voice that will serve to sculpt the psychological and environmental experiences that she has had into a body of work that she uses instead of a series of events that she suppresses. This voice that is present in any woman who is drawn to radical self-expression, shows up in many places besides her mirror. It shows up in the woman who leaves her cushy private firm lawyer job to start a nonprofit that brings green jobs to brown neighborhoods. It shows up in the woman who starts creating hair products that celebrate and complement Black women's hair instead of taming it to fit into a warped sense of manageability and professionalism. It shows up in the woman who becomes a professional yoga instructor after deciding that her nearly 200-pound body is beautiful and capable and meant for more than hiding. It shows up in the woman who writes the articles and sings the songs that most women who look like her are afraid to write for risk that they might piss off the people who sign the checks. It shows up in the woman who frees herself from the confines of objectification and blame by dressing for herself, not for someone's approval, and not without a thought of whether the length of her skirt might trigger his need to grab her ass. It shows up in how we raise children, and it shows up in our decision not to have children. It shows up in our often lonely mind wanderings as to whether we can let go of all the not it shit and just do the work we love. And when we are radical enough to do that work, when we take the less traveled road of authentic expression, we become beacons of hope and reminders of the option to choose ourselves in ways that inevitably influence the boys, girls, men, women, and gender variant counterparts who are silently suffering from those same suppositions. Radical self-expression is indeed and in fact an act of self-preservation that allows introspection and self-exploration to translate outwardly onto our communities. When we manage the energy of our experiences, past and present, instead of just walking along our life's path, tucking, rolling, and reacting to whatever comes our way, without recognition of our ability to harness what we know and express what we love, we become change agents. We become the small instances of change that push limitations and fears aside in favor of the audacity to turn a dream into a goal, into a series of tasks that become not just what we believe, but what we are doing to see the world we desire, starting boldly with ourselves.